Thank you, Debbie. I think we should all give Debbie a big round of applause. She is amazing. She is amazing. She makes this thing rock and stay on time, and she brings all of you great people together. So thank you all for coming to the 6th Annual Uniting Women in Cyber. Took me a long time to come up with the name, about 10 minutes, when I sat in the office with my colleague from CIT at that time, Ed Elbrigio. I said, Ed, we need to get diversity into cyber, and we need to bring women together, and they need to be recognized for all the work that they do. And he's like, okay, so what should we do? I'm like, well, let's have a conference. And he said, okay, what should we call it? And I said, well, how about Uniting Women in Cyber? That's what we're doing. So that's what we did. And so that was the prefix to all this, and it's just grown and grown and grown. And I guess I heard we grew out of the space today, so we're gonna be more inclusive, and Debbie's gonna have to figure that out, because it's an amazing problem to have. So now I'm gonna introduce you to Teresa, who is the co-chair of the Cyber Guild, and she took the reins from me with Brian Ware, and I'm so proud of them because really it's growing leaps and bounds under their direction. So Teresa's a great friend and a powerhouse leader and influencer in intelligence and security. She's the president of Oplnet and served on many boards and nonprofits, including serving on the board of Uniting Women in Cyber. The Cyber Guild is the parent of Uniting Women in Cyber, just for housekeeping, in case you guys didn't know. And Teresa has been on a 30-year journey that took her to NSA leadership and Signet Intelligence. For those of you who know that, she's an expert in that. And just so you know, at the first, I was just talking to Linnie Haynesworth, who's on this on this panel. And at the first Uniting Women in Cyber, we had a author come from, called Code Girls. And really, in my preface of reading the book, the women of this country founded NSA, and everybody should know that, because they were the first cryptologists during World War II. So I encourage you to read the book. So Teresa at NSA, she ran all the aspects of Signet and advised the director of NSA, DNI, and 4-star military combat generals and many others. After NSA, she served as the EVP of Tech and Cyber at IQT and the VP of Raytheon Codex. She's a highly decorated woman with awards from Presidents Obama and George W. Bush and the CIA Donovan Award. Please welcome this panel and my good friend, Teresa.
It's great to see you guys. What an awesome day we've had today. So many great discussions, and I am super excited about being here with this esteemed group of ladies to talk about women on boards. I am not going to go into the detail that Mary Beth went into, but trust me, all of these ladies are the ones that have broken leadership barriers, are those that have broken into boards and have succeeded on numerous boards, both for-profit, not-for-profit, public, private. So they've done it all. And our conversation today is going to be very honest and frank. So get your questions ready, because we are going to have some good, bad, and ugly. It's going to be right here laid out in front of you. So let me start by just doing a quick introduction. I'm hoping in these conversations that you're going to learn more about these individuals as they tell personal stories and personal journeys. And that's really what it's all about, right? The personal journeys and how you get there. But let me start with my dear friend Sue Gordon, the Honorable Sue Gordon. Sue was a former PD DNI. That's the Principal Deputy Director of Intelligence, so second in command, and she had an esteemed career at the Central Intelligence Agency, and she is now the president of Gordon Ventures, a company that you started, and
I've got to run something.
And as I said, she's on numerous boards, both public and private. And then we have Linnie Haynesworth next to her, and Linnie is also on numerous boards, an independent board director, and Linnie had an esteemed career formerly at Northrop Grumman as a Northrop Grumman executive. And then, of course, we have Amy DeSalvatore, who is a partner today, business development and platform at Night Dragon, and a fellow board member on the Cyber Guild, so get the chance to work with Amy. And then finally, over there on the other side of the table is Summer Anderson. And Summer is the managing director of the executive search firm ZRG, and she has done so much for women in this field and for women on boards and women in key positions. So why don't we just jump right into it? And I'm going to start with the first question here. Linnie, could we start with you?
Sure.
All right. So tell us, what do you think the benefits of having a diverse board of directors? What are the advantages of diversity on board of directors, particularly if you could, in the field of cybersecurity?
Sure. So first of all, I'm glad to be here. I'm really glad to see all of you. I think about diversity on boards in terms of impedance match to problem set. So if that makes sense to you, let's just start with I'm a little bit geeky, I'm a little bit engineering. So an impedance match to the problem set of fast-paced, diverse threat. And do we have the right people in the room to challenge, to understand, and to create, I'll say, an approach for addressing risk, specifically around cyber, but more broadly in the boardroom, it's addressing risk to execute the company's strategy. So diverse thinkers, diverse experiences, and where cyber is also concerned, diverse set of relationships. Because solving that problem, particularly in the throes of a real challenge, really requires the use of your relationships, the company's relationships, and the board director's relationships. So those things, I think, are key benefits to having just varied thinking in the room and conversations that wouldn't happen if everyone was a CEO or CFO with no technical background.
Yeah, that's great. Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll start with general and then I'll dive into cyber because I think cyber is kind of its own special little thing. But in the general sense, if you look at the statistics, and Night Dragon's done a ton of research around diversity on boards, working with NACD and ISC2 and NYSE. So some of that research, what we found, the McKinsey study, basically said that companies in the top quartile of gender diversity, gender specifically, had a 39% likelihood of outperforming companies that don't have that level of diversity. So performance is number one. The benefit, you're going to do better as a company. So you want mixed genders on your board. That's number one. Number two, if you look at cyber, and this goes to what you were saying, Linnie, it's an extremely complex, diverse threat landscape. You've got, adversaries and threat actors in Russia and in China and a 15-year-old in his basement. And when you look at that landscape and what's happening across geopolitically and the motivations for these people in launching attacks, it requires a diverse set of perspectives to respond to it and to understand it. So if you have a homogenous group of white men on a board that don't have any diversity of experience or lack of ethnicity diversity, that's going to be an issue in really grasping what's happening and the gravity of it and how to respond to it. So the more that you can kind of mix that up and bring in people from different geographies and different walks of life who will understand the complexity and have experience with that, you're going to be a better board. You're going to be able to serve that company, and you're going to be able to understand it when your CISO comes in to brief you on what's happening. Right? That's part of the problem. CISOs come in and brief a board, and the board doesn't really understand what they just said.
So Amy, just kind of to put a fine point on that, I think what I heard you say was the McKinsey study, the data shows 39% better performance for those businesses, companies that have women on their boards.
Yep.
Is that right?
That's right.
39%. That's
39% likelihood of outperforming those that don't.
Yeah. Well, that seems like is that an easy button to push? So with that, let's get your opinion here. What do you think the specific skills and experience, if they're trying to get to that 39%, What is it that women can bring to the board? What kind of skills and experiences do you think that are valued in that space?
So everything is too general an answer. So I think I'll be overgeneral in terms of ideational fluency. I think this is actually something that women are especially good at being able to listen, hear, and then connect, and then find and then implement on those connections. And especially because cyber sits at this really interesting intersection between geopolitics, mission, and technology. And as both Linnie and Amy said, technology is scary.
Yeah.
To many leaders who sit on boards of my generation. We think of cyber as a technical issue, when in fact it's just the manifestation of intent. And you have to be thinking about how all these things together to affect risk in your company. And I think I've just named the kind of skills that women can bring, but also that ability to kind of make connections of disparate elements in order to find the thing. I think there are a lot of specific skills. You have to be technical enough.
Yeah.
You really do have to understand what your CISO is saying. You also, hopefully, are good at helping your CISO speak in a different language so you don't
Yeah.
Exactly.
glaze over. But that impedance mismatch, love that term, between how many endpoints the CISO has covered and what operational risk the company is buying with the choices they're making. You have to be technical enough to hear it, and then you have to be strategic enough to know what the implication is. So I think women have the opportunity to be that connector, but you have to have some element of each of the piece parts to be able to do it confidently.
Yeah. So listen, the middle word you used was test, connect? Mm-hmm. Yeah, listen, test, and connect. Summer, you've dealt with a lot of placing of women on boards and gotten feedback, I'm sure.
Probably that just for those of you that may not be familiar or younger in your careers, the first thing, it's sort of the table stakes, is understanding how businesses run. That's the first thing. Mm-hmm. So having P&L experience is just getting there. So as you're building your career, look for ways to run businesses. Look for ways to impact the bottom line and get in there and make an impact at that level. It doesn't happen right away, but say yes when you've got the opportunity. The second piece is that the cyber aspect, the cyber folks in this room, you naturally you have your antenna up for risk. That's how you're wired. And that's precisely what boards do. Their function is to make sure that every thought that is going through that board's mind is focused on how do we mitigate the risk. So you are naturally geared for that right now. CISOs, to your point, Sue, bring to bear a really important aspect about the tech charter. What does great look like? So when the executives are listening, they can say, oh, yep, that's it. Or no, that doesn't match. So being able to have a great litmus test is part of that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, okay. So let's talk about decisions here and decision making. For both corporate and government, and I'd love to hear, Sue, why don't we start with you on this? I'd love to hear your experience in the
As long as you all will fix whatever I say. Teamwork.
Can you share some of your experiences or highlights on the advantage of having diversity in the decision-making space?
Oh, holy smokes. So you have to have diversity. I had an experience, one of the early boards I joined, it was a venerable board, it was a performant board, and it had been together for 20 years.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So think about that. It was highly performant, company does well, well regarded. Everyone on that board is tuned to the same frequency. I joined the board during COVID.
Here comes Sue.
We didn't hold even virtual meetings.
Wow.
So the board meetings were on the phone.
Wow.
Morka Dorka Borka, she comes in, and I'm a disruptive technology, and we can talk about knowing yourself, and I think we'll talk about how you present yourself for boards and the things that I now know and I didn't. But I tend to be bouncy. I join these calls, I'm listening. It is clear that there is no way for me into the conversation. There needs to be a way into the conversation because they're so similar. It's not that it's not good, it's just not enough. So I think not only is diversity important, and you can look at the performance of this company later when it got more diverse, and you by any empirical standard, it got better with more diversity on the board, even though it was very good. But the second thing is you have to actually both be diverse and inclusive. You do have to have an interpersonal relationship with the other board members. It's not enough to be someone who throws the grenade on the table and has that incredibly wonderful insight. So there's the necessity of different views, and then there's the craft of how you get heard, especially when you might be alone. And then how do you build the relationship so you're trusted so that they can hear it? Because it's not malfeasance when they can't hear a different opinion. It is they're so focused on what they've always known how to do. So it's super important, but there's also a craft to getting a different view into the mix, and you can't just shake your fist at the cosmos and wish that they'd listen to you. The pressures on you initially is to find a way in.
Oh, okay, Linnie.
Sorry.
Have you ever had any of those experiences?
I've had so many experiences in that way. And I think part of it for me was to learn, I'll call the balance of trade. So I learned early the difference between being a really great operator and being now kind of focused on governance and risk. And those are two different lenses to see the world through.
Really.
And the boardroom's role is that other role, not to be the operator. So, I've had experiences early on where I asked a question in one meeting, came back the next quarter, and there'd been a project assigned, an external company hired, and a big report delivered, and they wanted to know if they did it right. And I had no intention for that to happen, but I didn't know the balance of trade in terms of communication well enough to help them understand. Really, I just wanted their opinion about a topic relative to competitive analysis. That's all I wanted, not a science project. So I think the notion of how you communicate, how you prioritize, how you spend time with board directors external from the actual meeting to be able to establish relationships with each other, and then to think about specifically cyber in the context of the business and the risk. And sometimes that means after class, because you may be the only board director who can help the CISO come to the boardroom to tell where we are in the movie that's consumable by the directors. So.
Yeah.
Just one more thought. I will say there is an advantage to being different. And there's an advantage to your other board members to having someone who's different or has the reputation of thinking differently. And it's specifically around decision making. I do find, because I am still a relatively new board member, that people tolerate me saying more aggressive things than the others who have more established relationships.
Yeah, that's true.
So sometimes and again, you have to understand the moment and you have to understand the decision. And Summer, I just keep going back to what you're saying. You have to understand what you're doing for a living in that room. But when you're new and when you're different, sometimes you can say something and you can see it around the table like, oh, thank God. because they were so established in their relationships that it would have been inappropriate for them to say that thing that needed to be said. So while you want to figure out how to work, don't become homogeneous. Right? And it's that balance between owning your space, owning the difference, having that opportunity, but not being a dilettante, that you're going to work overtime.
And not compromising yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Amy, did you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, just about God, this brings back memories of I was specifically put on a board because I was different than the current board members. Specifically, I have operator experience, 25 years of being an operator, and the chairman wanted somebody in there to kind of whip the company into shape and to observe what was going on, because we didn't think that the board was seeing all of the things and maybe some of the issues that were happening, specifically with the CEO. So I went in and did exactly what Sue said not to do, threw a grenade, guns blazing, pointed out everything that needed to be changed, and they just totally dismissed me. It was like I wasn't there. And I mean, and then that was just infuriating for me that I wasn't being heard. I knew I was right, but that's not enough. I wasn't building an allegiance with the rest of the people. There was no consensus. I wasn't building relationships outside of the board. So all the things you were supposed to do, I wasn't doing. And the company ended up going under, and I'm like, I told you so. But that was the experience. And so, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what happens in this all is just, I wish he had taken me aside and done the whole balance of trade thing and said, this is about business risk and less ops, and I'm putting you on for ops, so you need to work extra hard to bring those things together and make sure that they respect and trust you before you give your opinions. That's not what I did.
Yeah, we were all good at things before we became directors.
Totally.
You have to become good at being a director. There's work and craft you have to do. It doesn't matter all the things you do. You have to learn all those things, and I'm a much better director than I was 4 years ago.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and knowing what that balance is to strike. If there is something that's dividing the board right down the middle, how do you make sure you make your point credibly and with confidence and with data and make it land so that it's received, and then be willing to accept which direction it goes and do that gracefully. That is how you get invited back.
As you clearly have.
Yes, as you clearly have.
So Summer, let's talk about a little bit, maybe starting with you on, could we talk a little bit maybe about those key challenges that women are facing today in just even getting on a board? I think, Sue, you were telling me a little bit in the hallway about your first board interview.
Happy to share.
Yeah.
After summer.
And how could these, how do you think they could best be addressed? How do we learn to be a board director if we've never been one? It's like the cart and the horse thing, right?
It's funny, in 2018 when there was a law being passed in California to really lift women into board work, I had a lot of conversations with women who were incredible operators. They knew their craft, they knew how to run businesses beautifully. But halfway through our salad, they'd lean in and say, I'd love to be on a board, but I don't have the network. I have aging parents, I have kids in high school and college and about to get married, about to have a baby. I have this giant operating role, and how am I gonna play golf? And I just said, okay, what if we put you in a room with other women who are like you, they're altruistic, for dinner twice a year, would you be down? And some of the women leaned in and cried, because they felt like, I've not been in a room with others like me almost ever. So it's networking, it's doing what you're doing today. It's building those relationships, it's asking. There's a really great story I'll share quickly of a woman who was sitting on a webinar that we put together where the women who were on sort of telling the story were board chairs. And the woman who was, one of them was listening, and she said, you know what? I called up the guy who gave me the advisory board role and asked him, how about that board seat? And he said, I was about to call you. But she said he may or may not have been. So ask is probably the next important thing that I'd say. Sue?
So I left government before I was ready, so I had done no preparing for what.
You guys have to ask her that
Yeah, I was
for
just,
that story in private.
I just done no preparing, and I got lots of great advice about spend time and whatever, and I became like Christmas shopping on the 24th of December when you're just panic buying, right? You realize that you don't have any presents, you buy way too much and spend way too much, and that was kind of like me. So I very early on had a great call from a headhunter that said, hey, there's a company looking for a board member, and I'm so excited. So I did all my research on the company, and I went in and I was on fire.
Yeah.
I was, yeah, totally. I was you. I was an operator, right? I had researched the company. I knew exactly what their strategic risks were. I know exactly what the company should do next, how they should consider. And I walked out and I'm thinking, I don't think that went particularly well.
Yeah.
Because it was just kind of in the middle. And I, in fact, didn't get a call back for that company. And I wasn't right. I didn't understand the different roles. So what I would say is every position, every level you achieve is a different job. You've got to learn that, and there are a lot of people that help you. Networking can help you, headhunters can help you, people who place with other board members can help you. I would have been better if I had asked all those things. The second thing is boards have positions, right? Not all the people are the same. You may or may not fit that position on the board. They may be looking for someone in finance and you're not that. They may be looking for someone who's going to focus on a particular client that they had. So you also have to think about what your strengths are, what position that you play. I would say what I got better at is being able to articulate what I bring in terms of what they need. And originally I thought I brought technology and geopolitics, but now I bring actually business acumen, but I didn't at the first time. So now I have more opportunities in more boards. You also have to know who you are. I've found in the interview process, it's really good to make it clear who you are so that they don't have buyer's remorse. I can sound delightful, but I need to understand the board's tolerance for a revolutionary, even playing the board position. So I think that combination of knowing what the position demands, what they're looking for, what you bring, and who you are all important things that you have to consider. Because I really hate that I missed that first opportunity, but I think I got all the others because I failed so miserably.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Linnie, you talked a little bit about scraped knees.
Yeah, and I think part of that onboarding process, I learned a few things. So one I mentioned earlier is just figuring out being clear about what I'm asking for. The other is that transition from operator to board director. When you get a board book in preparation, it's a lot of data. And if you happen to be on a financial institution, it's a lot of data. And I would go through that meticulously and write down, 100 questions. You can't ask 100 questions. So just the prioritization of what's important, sometimes pre-working with other board directors if there was something gnarly outside of the boardroom to prepare for the conversation that would happen. And then just being prepared is a fundamental thing. It's kind of like just the bottom line has to happen. And then finally, being ready for challenge. When things go well on a board or for a company, think about your own business, think about your own role. When there is a fire, what happens to you? Similar things happen on a board. When there is a fire, life changes in terms of board dynamic. And so being prepared for that, making sure your life can accommodate that, all of those kinds of things. But I've certainly stepped in it, recovered from stepping in it. I've certainly missed things that I, in hindsight, should have asked about more deeply. And I've learned.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an important point. We learn from our life experiences, and the next day we have an opportunity to make new choices and new decisions. But ladies, please, for all the ladies in the room, because we tend to do this a lot more than the men, from my observation and experiences, beat ourselves up. Yeah, that's not going to do you any good, so don't beat yourself up. Just make a new decision the next day. I want to bring this a little bit back to the cybersecurity field, if we could here. And so, Amy, can we talk a little bit maybe about, we had some conversation about the CISOs coming in and briefing the boards, and there needs to be a translation there to English. What is it that boards can do to effectively address the cybersecurity mission for the company or protection for the company?
Yeah. Well, we kind of looked, I think there's 3 different levels of being cyber ready and cyber prepared as a board. And some of this we went through in this recent market report that we did. The best case scenario is that you have somebody with cyber expertise on the board. And ideally, that person is a chief information security officer, or was a chief information security officer at some point. But the reality is that if you look across the S&P 500, that's 2%. So they're not doing it. That's not really working. There's not many of them on boards. So then you go to the second next best approach, which would be you have cybersecurity expertise, but they're not necessarily a chief information security officer. And that's maybe like a former CEO of a cyber company, somebody who's very active in the cyber community. That's fantastic. That's also great. That's less than 15% of the S&P 500. So then you get to where we are today and where we are making some really good progress. And that's kind of an okay approach. And that's where you have the chief information security officers or other cyber professionals coming in and briefing the board. So you guys have probably seen that. That's happening, not nearly as much as we'd like it to happen, but it's happening right now, usually quarterly. I think if we could see that happen on a monthly basis, we'd probably be in better shape than we are today. And we, at Night Dragon, we have a council of 100 chief information security officers. So we often survey them and ask them how frequently they're going in and what they're expected to know. And a lot of them, the feedback is that even though they're going in and briefing the boards, the frustration is that the board is not educated enough to understand what they're saying. So there's the effectiveness of the board receiving that information is in large part dependent on the board educating themselves. It's true that the CISOs also being educated on presenting it in a way that it's not highly technical, but it's more framed into that business risk and financial risk impact. And all of those things have to come together in kind of a perfect way for the board to be informed. And so we have a lot of work to do still, but I mean, I don't know what your opinion is. I feel like it's moving in the right direction. You're starting to see more briefings happen, and there is more awareness at the board level. But I just, from where we sit with our portfolio companies and other public boards that we're a part of, I think we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, it's still a gap from my perspective. I haven't heard, I think almost everyone would say we just haven't crossed that boundary yet. I do think an intermediate step is to get the board to ask questions. Like you can say things like, what are you worried about? Do you have needs that haven't been met? I think that is a question that you can ask of the CISO that gets them to be willing to share with you the choices that they're making, because there is no company that is spending enough money to cover every risk. And so I think that may be a transportation that boards can provide to that ultimate nirvanic state.
That's right.
I would just add that the conversation can be, I'll say, motivated a little more by asking cyber-related questions of business leaders. Because as soon as you ask a business owner a question that they don't know the answer to, guess what happens the next quarter, right? So there's a lot of focus and attention on them consuming and understanding their cyber risk, and that's only good for the whole enterprise. That's a lift for everybody. There's that, and then having the CISO kind of schooled in how to talk about the business aspect of the risk, which is not necessarily something that's part of their, I'll say, walk to the role that they've had. So that those two things I think help from a cyber risk oversight perspective.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to ask one last question, then we're going to open it up to all of you. So think of your hard questions for these brilliant ladies. And my last question is really about leadership in cybersecurity, and maybe some experiences and some lessons learned that you took away from your experiences in leading in cybersecurity space. Summer, you want to start? You've been kind of quiet down there.
I would say, so cyber leaders have a unique remit, if you will. You're looking at the corporate infrastructure, and today it's not just the bits and bytes. You're also talking about what other people are doing on that network. So AI, we've been talking about that a lot today. And being able to put together a tech charter is really an important aspect for the board, if we kind of stay here for a minute, because if that CISO, if the cybersecurity team can put together that litmus test that we talked about earlier, hey board, these are the check boxes we need to go through in order to call it good. And if we're falling short on any of these, then we need to start asking some questions that send things moving in the right direction. So I think it's partially just from a cyber perspective on the board, making sure that you're setting up the governance, the framework to hold everybody accountable, and that you actually make space and time for it on a regular cadence so it happens. And then ask those hard questions.
Sue?
I try and focus on outcome. What are we trying to do? Right? So cyber is a modality, but it isn't the point at the board level, but the board level. So, when I try and translate the question that I have is, how is our client data protected? Right? Because that's actually what we're trying to do. It's the point of why you have it. Or when we have an M&A activity, have we looked into the cyber profile of the company that we're looking at, because we don't want to assume their additive risk? So I think that's one of the things that leaders can do. And what's awesome about that is, one, it keeps you from thinking that you still have that job that they now have. And the second is, it weirdly builds trust, right? It says, this is what we're doing. Can you talk to me about your contribution to that? And then it helps with the transportation between the technical and the risk that is really what we're caring about. So I try and focus on outcome and what we're trying to do.
Amy, do you or Linnie want to jump in here?
I mean, for me, the lead, in order to lead in cybersecurity in a board context, it really requires all the things that we talked about here, and kind of understanding how a board works and not compromising yourself, but tailoring your approach to what you know will be successful, because you'll never lead if you come in and aren't really aware of the dynamics and playing to that dynamic in some sense. So I had after the first few meetings, I ended up calling this woman that I really respect and knew she had board work. And I remember telling her about my experience, and she said to me, she was like, you need to go in and be quiet. Don't say a word, just listen. And I was like, that's not happening. I was like, okay, I'll go in. But then I stood back and I was like, maybe I could just listen a little bit more, and calm down. And so then I started doing that, not completely sacrificing all of my thoughts and everything that I wanted to say, but just doing a little bit, just enough that I was picking up little tips and cues on how to soften my approach, and that helped. So I just think really taking those cues from people who have experience, like the women on this stage, and then implementing that in a way will put you in a place to better lead.
There is a special joy if you get the chance to serve on a board with another woman. It's fantastic because you can have those moments.
Yeah.
There are people you can look up to. And when something goes wrong, you can call them up and say, either, what the heck happened? I thought it was this, and they'll tell you, or they will say, what the heck did you just do to me? Right? Anyway, and for something about that, the ability to have the just raw conversation outside of it is just a special
gift.
moment.
And can I just say, I think that's a great practice to start now. wherever you are in your career, develop relationships with other women where you are frank with each other
Yeah.
and feedback, because feedback just makes us better.
it does.
Yeah.
And the skin knees make us better. But if someone's alongside you and goes, it happens to us all, it means you've been in the trenches together. So.
Totes.
All right, let's open this up. Felicity, do you want to start?
Should I just speak really loud?
Yeah.
One of my favorite humans here.
Hi, Felicity speaking. So hypothetically, if my goal was in the next 5 or 10 years to be on a board, what would you say? So I have lots of notes here: networking, understanding the different roles, being okay with not golfing, whatever. But I got specific things that I should do in the next 5 to 10 years to position myself to be useful and wanted on a board. I've been on nonprofit boards, but that's not what we're talking about. Yeah, that would be really lovely to hear. Thank you.
I'm happy to share a couple thoughts. One is understand the role of the board. And you can do that through a lot of venues. NACD is one, but lots of organizations provide just insights about how boards work and what the different committees are that are required by the SEC, your new friend, and find out what the jobs are on the boards. Read proxy statements so you understand what boards actually are doing and how companies are thinking about it. And then finally, I'd say when you can join a board, get on a committee that has a relationship with a public board if that's what you seek. Audit committee on INSA, for example, was a place that I first got on a committee that would apply to a public board. And if you can, in your role, get in your company's boardroom.
That's good.
Hi, Cassie Crossley. Challenging, if you're a builder, if you like to create things, moving from that operator role to taking what almost seems like a back seat is very different if you're used to that creative, innovative. And so are you being fulfilled? Is your cup being filled in the board work, or are you having to supplement with other activities so that if you're one of those that really wants to see growth and build things?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Number one is maybe it's not for you, right? Because it is totally different. And I think by disposition, I am probably more of a line leader. I love leading, right? So I would say it's possible that that's just a role you prefer. But this one is so good to experience because it is a whole different level of understanding. It's like, has anyone been an executive assistant for an executive? Right? And that is so valuable because you see how decisions are really made. You see what the higher level consideration is. So if you think you want to experience it, and you do the things that the lady said to be prepared, there is something stunning about it when you watch it being done well. And even if you decide that it's not for you, the benefit you will have derived to understand that level of consideration, that level of concern, is really remarkable. So, we're all different. I have learned, my cup is super filled from this because I am so much better at everything. And even if I went back to line leadership, for knowing the things here and knowing the people here.
I'd love to tell a story so because you're in cyber and you're used to having the house burning down around you and you are firefighters, you're really good at it. There are those board experiences too. And once you're known as someone that can handle that, you get recruited again and again. Yeah. So one story I'll share, there was a woman who we were at dinner together and she had said to the other women around the table, has anybody dealt with activist investors? And all the hands shot up. Yep, done it. Anybody dealt with having to have physical security because there's death threats? No hands. But there was one woman who's like, I know a guy. Here's the card. And we all leaned in the next meeting to say, what happened? How'd it go? And it was firefighting from the inside out. So it's a different kind of like Hail Mary, but know that the flavor of what you are geared for will find you. if it's something you want to do.
That's awesome. So, Mary Beth, did you want to ask one last question? We have a few seconds.
So just to go off what Summer said, make sure you have risk tolerance to be on a board, because there's a fiduciary part, a component that, having spent 12 years on Wall Street doing insurance, I saw some pretty nasty D&O claims when people thought they were doing the right thing. And then what happens is, if one person on the board made a decision, or if a CEO made a decision, you all have to know about that, because you are fiduciary liable for all the actions of the company. And so make sure that you first ask what their D&O is, and make sure that you really understand it and understand where their risks are. So.
That is such a critical point.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah,
All right. Ladies, thank you so much for being here this afternoon and sharing your stories.
Thank you.
Like herding cats.